Started. Just to make an announcement that we'll be recording this session for anyone who is unable to watch live. They can tune in through our virtual library after the fact. So I want to welcome Richard Mancuso and Naveed Ahmad. They are co-founders of Flourish. They are graciously giving us some great advice about burnout. So let me tell you first a little bit about Richard. He is the co-founder and president of Flourish. He graduated from CMC, studied philosophy and economics. His senior thesis was in applied ethics. He started his career in healthcare and really developed a passion about healthcare and how he can better bring good and sustainable habits to people so that they can really get the most that they can out of life, out of productivity and sharing so that people can reach their full potential. And Naveed is the co-founder and CEO of Flourish. He has spent a lot of his career in the healthcare system as well. So let me tell you a little bit about how this session is going to go. There are two different views that you can use in Zoom, the speaker view or grid view. If you highlight speaker view, you will see the person speaking, and grid view, you can see everyone's video. So we are going to mute all, and I will turn over to Richard so he can start his presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenna, for the kind introduction. And good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to those who are outside of the West Coast, which doesn't seem to be too many on the chat or based on the responses here. And yeah, hello to those of you. I've also seen some familiar faces in there. Of course, John Ferranda is representing and Evan. So hello, everyone. Before we dive in, I'd like to take just a minute to acknowledge the various circumstances that we all join this conversation from. Some of those are shared amongst us, the wildfires, COVID, and some are more unique to us as individuals. And regardless of who you are and where you are in your journey as you join us today, I want you to know that you're welcome in this space with us. As Jenna mentioned, today we're going to talk about something that's very top of mind for many of us right now, particularly with the immense change and uncertainty and stress of a pandemic, and also a topic that's very personal for me and for my co-founder Naveed, and that's burnout. We'll spend some time covering the basics, what we like to call Burnout 101, what burnout is, how you know that you have it, and what you can do tactically to prevent and manage it. It'll be interactive throughout. We'll have some check-in questions that we have folks answer along the way. You can also feel free to put questions in the chat. And as Jenna mentioned, there'll be an opportunity for Q&A at the end. And then we'll also have a little something special that we'd like to offer just for the CMC community at the end. So be sure to stick around for that. All right, let's kick it off by checking in. I'd like to have you all answer a quick poll. Liam from our team will go ahead and pop that into the Zoom chat. And the question is, what motivated you to join this session today? Are you feeling like you're in the thick of burnout right now and hoping to learn what you can do? Are you wondering whether you might be burned out and how to figure that out? Or maybe something else? Regardless of where you're coming to this conversation from, we'll be sure to cover some things that will be relevant to you. And while you all take a minute to answer that, I'd like to introduce my co-founder, Naveed, who heads up coaching at Flourish, and he's going to share a little bit more about his burnout experience. So over to you, Naveed. I think you may be on mute.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Great. All right. Well, as Richard mentioned, I mean, the conversation around burnout today is just so important, especially given all of the multiple layers of stress that we're all under, from COVID to the wildfires to issues around racial justice, to maybe different dynamics that we're all individually experiencing at home these days. But the burnout conversation is really about fulfillment. And I've had the good fortune to make this work my career, but as Richard mentioned, it really comes from a personal place. I only got into this work after I had a really key learning, which is very important to the conversation today. So I want to begin by telling you that story. I'm the son of Pakistani immigrants. And as a son of immigrants, I had really clear instructions for how to achieve success and fulfillment. I was to get good grades, go to a good school, get a good job, and voila. And I tried to do all of those things, but along the way, I realized that something was missing. And this all came to a head about a decade ago. I was in Zurich. I was running a meeting around poverty alleviation. And the meeting had ministers from developing countries and CEOs from around the world. And this was really meaningful work. And I was really excited to be able to do it. And I get back to my hotel room after running this multi-day meeting, and I'm just completely exhausted. And I kind of, just feeling really stressed and hungry and just tired, and fling my coat onto the ground, not even like having the energy to like hang it up properly. And I go and I sit down on my bed, and I habitually flick open my laptop. And in my laptop, there are 2 emails. And these 2 emails represent probably the 2 extremes of emotion that I could have felt at that time in my life. So one is from my boss's boss, and it's letting me know that I just got promoted. And not only did I just get promoted, but I got promoted early. And this was something I had worked really hard for at the time and was really important to me. You'd imagine that I would have felt some joy or some excitement or maybe some relief, but I didn't feel any of those things. I felt nothing. And then the other email that I got was from my girlfriend. And she was letting me know that she was breaking up with me, which, by the way, is bad enough to do over email to somebody who's like 10 time zones away. But worse than that was the reason that she was breaking up with me. She was breaking up with me because of my ethnicity. I mean, it can be really hard to just put into words, even now, like what I should have felt in that moment, like rage or anger or frustration or sadness. But I didn't feel any of those things. I felt nothing. All I could do in that moment was flick my laptop closed, lean back on my bed, and pass out, suit and tie and all. I know now that it was burnout, but at the time, I couldn't see the signs. The way I was living just wasn't working for me. Something had to change. So I embarked on a journey to figure out what that was. And I did all the things that you'd imagine. When you Google burnout, you focus on self-care, meditated more, exercised, ate right, focused on my relationships. Even was fortunate enough to be able to have the time to quit my job and really put energy into these things. And I was fairly successful at them. I even, during that period lost 40 pounds. But I still wasn't happy. And I couldn't really figure out why until one day I talked to my dad. And so I get this call from my dad, and I ask him how he's doing. And he says, insanely busy. He's insanely busy. And which I'd known my dad to be, pretty busy over the years, but at this point he was retired. So it was a bit ironic that he was still insanely busy in retirement. And I asked him, Dad, what have you been up to? Like, why are you so busy? And this is what he tells me. He says he's been searching all day for a receipt to a couch from the 1980s, because this couch that we still have has a couch cushion that he wanted to get replaced for free, and has a lifetime warranty. So he needed the receipt in order to get this replaced. And I'm just like, Dad, like the absurdity, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you spending your time on this? And, I chuckle a little bit, but at the same time, I've known my dad for a long time, and this kind of like makes sense for him, right? He unfortunately, grew up in an environment where they didn't have very much. He, was born on the wrong side of of a line, which meant that when he was 4 years old, he and his family had to get up and board a refugee plane to move to newly created Pakistan. And in that moment, they lost all of their material wealth. So he spent a lot of his life growing up in this place of scarcity, which I think really drove him to be very money conscious most of his life, which makes sense. But why was he still worrying about that in retirement? I mean, he was by no means rich, but had prepared himself to be comfortable in financially in retirement. And then it hit me. He wanted to give his life savings to me and my brother so that we wouldn't have to live the life of scarcity that he did. And in that moment, I felt deeply loved and deeply sad. Because I grew up with my dad knowing him as someone who was oftentimes very frustrated and angry and really concerned about all these what seemed like really little things around money. And he had ultimately measured himself, his life, by what he was going to give to me and my brother. But the impact of doing that was that he didn't have space for the relationship that I think he really wanted with my brother and me. And I know that we wanted with him. And I was doing the same thing. I mean, for me, it wasn't about being able to give a better life to my kids at the time, because I don't have any. But for me, it was about achievement, about what were my accolades. That's how I was measuring my life. And I want to make a point that none of these are bad things. I mean, some folks may even describe them as noble. But in the process of measuring ourselves that way, we lost track of ourselves. And it was only after I was able to value myself for just being human, independent of all those other things, that the rest of my efforts in the world actually felt satisfying in the way I had always hoped. And this is what's so important for us here today, is that there's a real value in working hard, achieving our goals, and committing ourselves to the service of others. But those things by themselves cannot be how we measure ourselves, how we measure our value. In fact, doing so is a clear path to burnout. To realize fulfillment, we need to feel valuable just for being human. Being human is enough. And so I'm so glad to be speaking with you all today, because I know that so many of us show up every day wanting to contribute our best, wanting to be there for our colleagues, wanting to be proud of the work we're doing. And when burnout hits, it can be so difficult, especially right now, given COVID and financial uncertainty and just the general state of the world. And in that place, so many of these underlying issues are exacerbated. But awareness, like for most things, is the first step. And what we want to spend some time here today talking about is how you can maybe have a little bit more awareness as to whether or not burnout is something that's going on for you. And so Richard now is going to share a little bit about what we call the 6 surprising signs of burnout.
Wow. I've heard Naveed share his story so many times now, and every time I can't help but feeling a little bit emotional as I listen to it, just because there's so much in there that really resonates with me, and I'm sure with so many of you too. As Naveed mentioned, I'd like to shift gears a little bit and get practical, and talk about how you might be headed toward or are already struggling with burnout. As I quickly flipped through the responses to the question that we asked you all at the beginning of this talk, it seems like a lot of folks are uncertain as to whether they might be burned out. There's something going on there, and you're not feeling great, but you're wondering whether it might be burnout. And so now we're going to cover what we like to call the 6 surprising signs of burnout. And they're surprising because any one of these signs alone might be pretty normal to most of us. But the issue comes when we're experiencing several of these signs on an ongoing basis. So let's go ahead and jump into them. Liam's going to pull a slide up. And great. So sign number 1 is the Sunday Scaries. This one's been really popular to talk about lately. I've seen it all over social media. It's Sunday afternoon. You're having a relaxing day with your friends, your partner, your loved ones. Maybe you're hanging out at the park, socially distanced, when suddenly a thought pops into your mind about work. Now, maybe something triggered it, like you got an email or a Slack notification on your phone, but maybe absolutely nothing triggered it. The thought just popped into your head, and next thing you know, you notice that your pulse is quickened. If you wear an Apple Watch like me, it thinks you're exercising and it's telling you to keep up the great work. But your mind is racing, and now suddenly you're rushing home to pop open your laptop just so that you can take care of a couple things. You got to get a few emails off, jot down a few to-dos so that you can get ahead for the week. But next thing you know, it's now 8 p.m., you haven't had dinner, and it takes you hours to reset, to take care of yourself, wind down, eat, and quiet your mind before you can finally relax and go to sleep. Does that sound familiar to any of us? The second sign is snooze addiction. Now, who's been here? This one is one of my telltale signs. It's how I know that there might be something going on. Maybe I need to take my foot off the gas pedal a little bit. You've got a lot to get done tomorrow. You're feeling ambitious as you go to sleep, so you set the alarm at a reasonable but early time. And 6:30 a.m. rolls around. The alarm blares. You reach for your phone on your bedside table. Your eyes are still closed. You're fumbling for the snooze button somewhere on your touchscreen until you finally find it. Silence and warmth and 9 glorious more minutes of incredible quality sleep. This is such a relatable experience for so many of us, but where it becomes a problem is when you find yourself hitting snooze several times each morning, several times per week. Now, sign number 3 is what we like to call just one more syndrome. This one is really about your consumption increasing. We've all been there. It's the end of a long day. You're feeling stressed. You're able to finally pull yourself away from your computer to eat dinner. But afterward, your mind is still racing. You can't shut it off. You feel compelled to go back to work, but you don't really want to. And you need something to help take the edge off a little bit. It could be a glass of wine or 2, or maybe an episode of the latest binge-worthy show on Netflix. And the reason that we like to call this one just one more syndrome is because that if you're struggling with burnout, over time, just 1 or 2 glasses of wine, or 1 or 2 episodes of Netflix, or 1 or 2 cups of coffee if you're trying to cope with some of the stress and low energy during the day, it just won't cut it anymore. And you'll find yourself wanting 1 more of those things to feel the same benefit. Sign number 4 is planning your escape. This one often goes hand in hand with consumption. It's this feeling of wanting to get away. It's 3 p.m. on a Friday afternoon and you should be wrapping up your week. But instead you pop open 2 new tabs in Google Chrome. One is Google Flights and the other is Airbnb. Now Google Flights shows that there's a flight to Cancun next Friday from LAX. It's $350. It's not bad. You'll cover with points anyway. You might even get a free upgrade. It returns Monday morning. It's doable. You can make it back in time to not have to miss any work. And you tab over to Airbnb, shows a beachfront, beautiful 3-bedroom condo for 3 nights. It's totally reasonable price. You could even bring a few friends along. But here's the catch. You have absolutely no intention of actually taking this trip. Why? It's because fantasizing about an escape of some sort relieves some of the stress and overwhelm that you're experiencing in that moment. You know, we've heard a lot of folks also say they sometimes just feel like they want to get in the car and drive. They don't know where. They just want to get out of here. Now, these last 2 signs are a little more self-explanatory, so I'll move through them quickly. The 5th is sharp weight change. It's a classic sign of the type of excessive stress that's a staple in the burnout experiences of so many. For some, it's weight gain. For others, it's weight loss. And finally, number 6 is counting the minutes. We've all had those times when we've gotten to work or joined a meeting or a class where we're already anticipating the end before it's even started. And in many cases, when you're burned out, this may start to happen with things that you actually used to really enjoy previously. So these are the 6 signs of burnout. It's important to keep in mind that all of these signs exist on a spectrum of intensity and frequency. And, you know, just because you're experiencing one of them or a couple of them with some regularity or, you know, even infrequently, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're burned out. But if you look at this list and many of them really, really resonate with you, it might just be the gentle nudge that you need to take a little bit of a closer look at what might be going on under the hood. And so now I'm going to hand it back to Naveed to walk us through what folks who are struggling with burnout and recognize these signs, they're, you know, ready to do something. What do they learn when they look the next layer deeper? Naveed?
Thanks, Richard. What's really nice about these signs is that what they really describe are the symptoms. These are some of the things that people who are struggling with burnout notice or could notice as to what's going on in their daily life. But what they're not describing is the real problem. The real problem that folks that are struggling with burnout is that the way that you're relating with your work is creating what we call excessive drive. And to explain this, let me use a little bit of an analogy, and that's one of a car. Excessive drive is having your foot on the gas all the way so that your RPMs are in the red, and pretty soon, you're going really fast, but pretty soon your engine's going to overheat and things are going to just break down. That's excessive drive. That's burnout. And I want to make sure I'm clear about this. It's not that drive in and of itself is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I know that a lot of us are very driven, and that's resulted in a lot of great things in our lives. But it's when that drive becomes really excessive that we find ourselves doing things that are no longer good for ourselves. That's when things can get really dangerous. In my personal example, it was that achievement, that promotion was driving me consistently to sacrifice my sleep, to sacrifice my eating, to not spend enough time exercising, and to not focus on my relationships that were really important to me. All of those things took not only a lower priority, but a far back seat to my work on the day-to-day. And so while the 6 signs that we described, like I mentioned a moment ago, are the symptoms, when you really look under the hood and you look at, well, what's the real problem? It comes back to how are you relating with your work and whether or not that's creating what we call excessive drive. And Richard, in a moment, is going to talk a little bit about how to actually address this real problem and a lot of the great research that we've done to understand how to address this real problem. But before we jump in there, let's pull up for a second and have a quick check-in. So I think, Liam, if you could go ahead and please put into the chat now a quick survey, a 2-question survey for folks to fill out, just so we can get a sense for how much is this resonating? You know, do the 6 signs feel like things that you're noticing on a day-to-day? Is excessive drive something that seems to be present in your life at the moment? So Liam's gone ahead and put that in the chat. So please, everybody, take a moment to fill that out. But with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Richard to share more about how you can actually address this real problem.
Yeah, so Naveed mentioned, you know, excessive drive that's showing up in the way that you relate with your work. And the reality is that, you know, taking a critical look at your relationship with work and resetting that, making some changes in that, is not an easy thing to do. And so at Flourish, we've developed a 5-step process that has a lot of rooting in cutting edge research around behavior science and psychology from Stanford, and is rooted in, you know, tons of research and in-depth interviews that we had for several months, which have now turned into years of coaching folks. And we've used this with thousands of professionals to help them feel re-energized and motivated again. You know, unfortunately, we don't have time in today's session to walk through the entire process in detail. But what I would love to do is give you a preview of how that process works and what can happen when you leverage the power of that process. So as I mentioned, I think Liam's going to go ahead and put up that slide. So as I mentioned, it's a 5-step process. The first step in this process is to map your mind share. And this one's really about getting clear with yourself about what is and isn't working right now in your life. The second step is to examine your beliefs about work. You know, as Naveed mentioned, and it even showed up in his personal story that he shared with us all a few minutes ago, for many struggling with burnout, your relationship with work is at the core of it. And so we have a couple techniques that we like to use to help folks really quickly examine what their beliefs are about work. Both explicit and implicit is also really important here, and where they come from and why they exist, you know, what ways they've served you and in what ways they might no longer be serving you. Once you've taken stock of where you are now, step number 3 in the process shifts a little bit to be more forward-looking to the future. And that's constructing your Lifehouse. Now, this process helps you get really clear with yourself about your innate source of motivation that you have. And then you create a vision for your life and how work fits into that, that's fully aligned with it. And once you do that, you'll no doubt have a ton of changes that you want to make. You'll see the gaps between what your Lifehouse looks like and your mindshare map looks like. And we'll see an example of this in just a minute. But that's where step 4 comes in, which is to start with just one thing. You know, you'll be tempted, especially as overachievers, which many of us in this virtual room are, to want to make wholesale change in your life. But what we found is that it's most effective when you pick a single change that you want to make, and you run after that one for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then finally, step 5 is to get support and to employ a system to keep going. For those of us who are prone to burnout, recovering is a journey. You might feel some fast relief from the previous 4 steps as you go through them and kind of get clear with yourself about what's going on and what you need to do to move in the right direction. But there'll be times that you might head back in the direction toward burnout. And that's where a support system, whether it's from a community of folks at work or friends or loved ones, or even a coach or a therapist, really makes a difference here. And so on the next slide, I'll walk you through an example of what this process looked like for one of our recent clients, Rebecca. She's an HR professional working at a really fast-growing healthcare startup. And her mindshare map from step number 1 that we talked about is on the left side here. And then on the right is her Lifehouse. And so as you can see, in her mindshare map, like 80% or more of her mindshare was taken up by work. And then as she got clear with herself about, what was important and what changes she wanted to make, as she examined her relationship with work, she created this Lifehouse, which is, meaningfully different. And Liam, if you click just one more time, we'll have a little bit about what she had to say about this process in her own words. So she said, the circle in the center is what she calls the area rug. It's my focal point, and it may be swapped out in the future. I made the sun my alone time, as I need that to nourish me in everything that I do. Work is a garden outside of my home. Before, it was completely overrun with weeds, and I need constant reminders in order to not let it get out of control. Overall, this exercise helped me identify what I was prioritizing in my life without even realizing it. And I'm now making a conscious effort to architect my own home versus letting myself go on autopilot and have work play that role. And finally, on the next slide, here's what another one of our recent clients had to say about this process, just to show that it really can work. And there's something that lies on the other side of burnout and how you might be feeling now. Linda works as a tech administrator at a Fortune 200 company. And she said, I feel really good about this process. It's been life-changing for me. I'm more comfortable setting boundaries, and I now feel more present as a result. When I'm doing something, I no longer find my mind wandering to all the other things I could be worrying about. It's allowed me to take back control of my life, and I'm reveling in how this program has caused so many things to come to the forefront for me. I'm completely amazed. And now I'll hand it back to Naveed to talk a little bit about next steps and how we can take this work forward together.
Thanks, Richard. So as Richard has laid out there, there's this 5-step program and process that we've developed. It's all based off of the latest in behavior science and positive psychology, working with psychologists and other experts, as well as based off of our own individual research, having worked with thousands of folks now that are struggling with burnout. And what's really incredible is that we now run individual and group programs for people that are struggling with burnout to reset their relationship with work so they can feel motivated and energized, excited for life again. And in the program, participants chart a clear path out of their burnout. And this path ultimately leads to feeling like yourself again, on your way to living a satisfying, fulfilling life that so many of us are craving. And what we've really done is we've taken this 5-step process and we've streamlined it. We've made it to make it as easy and simple and as effective as possible. And using our system, we've eliminated years of unnecessary suffering for the people that we work with. And what we'd like to do now is that if you'd like to learn more about and even experience a bit of what working with us feels like, we've carved out a limited number of complimentary sessions for members of the CMC community. And these burnout professionals that you'd be speaking with typically charge hundreds of dollars an hour, which we're gifting to the community today, just given how much we know that people are struggling at the moment with everything that's going on. So I invite everybody to go ahead and if you're curious about learning a bit more, if the 6 signs were ones that resonated with you, if you feel like the real problem is something that you can see going on in your life, I'd invite you to schedule a free session with one of our burnout professionals to understand a bit more and to start to feel some relief. And I know that oftentimes when folks are struggling with burnout, a couple things can stand in the way of taking action. One is that you might be feeling really overwhelmed right now and not feeling like you have a lot of time. And even the idea of scheduling one more call might be something that just kind of feels like you don't have space for. But I really would invite you and urge you to go ahead and schedule that call, because the reality is that that feeling of overwhelm, that feeling that you don't have space for things, it's not going to get resolved by just doing more of the same. It just doesn't work that way. And another thing that I know that people oftentimes struggle with is just when we're feeling burned out, it can just be so hard to do anything. It can be hard to get out of bed in the morning, let alone take action to try to address it or change it. So I just really encourage, this is where our mantra of just doing one thing and picking one thing and making one change can be so important and impactful. And so the idea of just even scheduling one call for yourself, make that your one thing today that you do to start to try to make a change and in the place that you're feeling at the moment. So the link is on the slide. I think we're also going to go ahead and post that into the chat if we haven't already. Please invite you to do that. We have a limited number of spots available for the community, but we'd really love to have folks that need it to take advantage of this today. With that, go ahead and open it up to questions at this point. I know that folks might have been sharing some questions through the chat at the moment.
Thank you both so much. That
Yeah.
was a great overview of understanding burnout a little bit more and trying to figure out what we can do about it. And I really appreciate the roadmap that you have laid out. I have a couple of questions that have been sent to me through the chat. If anyone else has questions, feel free to add them into the chat or use the raise hand feature, and I can call on you. You can ask your question directly. So the first question that came in was about how critical sleep is to burnout. Can you describe how you can improve the quality of your sleep to avoid burnout?
Yes, sure, absolutely. Yeah, it is one that comes up all the time. It is one that comes up all the time. We actually have a lot of content that we've written about this on our website, but I'll try to summarize a couple of the key points that are so important around sleep. So first and foremost, there's people will talk oftentimes about the amount of sleep that you need to get. Well-known people talk about this 8-hour number, and what I would actually offer is that not everyone needs 8 hours of sleep exactly. That the number that everybody has their own number, and that number is somewhere between 7 and 9 hours. And if you're getting less than 7 hours, you're definitely not getting enough. And most people need actually more than 8 hours of sleep, which is something that can be such a struggle for people to hear, because we all like to optimize our lives and take advantage of every single extra moment. And the idea of giving an extra hour to sleep can feel like it's a real trade-off. But getting to the place where you understand how much sleep you need is one of the first steps. The second thing that is really important to understand is that having a consistent time that you go to bed and a consistent time that you wake up is really critical, really, really critical. Something I did not fully appreciate or understand for many, many years. And sleep was one of the things I struggled with intensely, which is one of the reasons snooze addiction is was a big sign that existed in my life. But this idea that you have a regular bedtime and you have a regular time that you wake up, because the kind of sleep that you're getting, the quality of the sleep, the kind of things that your body is doing to recharge physically and emotionally changes over the course of your sleeping period. And so if you're going to bed an hour or two later than you did the night before, say on the weekend, what you've just done is you've cut out 2 hours of physical recharge time that you needed, even if you extended 2 hours in the morning and woke up later, because you just didn't get the right type of sleep during that time that you during that shifted period of sleep that you've given yourself. So those are the two things that I would offer that are really important: volume, number of hours of sleep that people really often talk about, but the consistency with regards to the time that you go to bed is way more important than I fully appreciated until we really dug into the science to understand why.
Interesting. Great. Thank you. Another question asks, if your schedule doesn't allow to reduce responsibilities, what are some tips to create space for these new behaviors?
Yeah, so I guess that the question in and of itself kind of makes an assumption that I guess we would want to look at more deeply, right? Which is why does our schedule not allow for new behaviors? And it there could be very, very reasonable and valuable reasons for why that could be the case. I mean, some people have really incredible demands on their lives, but I would argue, or in most cases, when we work with folks, what we find is that if we're really honest with ourselves and we can get really clear around prioritization, that oftentimes there's more time that we can actually create in our lives than we realized. And that's and don't get me wrong, I think that sometimes when people talk about burnout, and oftentimes what people will look at is the idea of quitting their job or changing their job as a solution. And that's not what we're talking about, and that's not what we're about. And in fact, most people that quit their jobs as an attempt to resolve or address burnout find themselves burned out again 6 months later. It's really not an effective way to address burnout. And what it really is about looking at your relationship with work, how it's showing up in your life, and how you can actually create the space for the other things that are really important.
Great. And then I got a small handful of questions that all kind of center around the same theme. So I'll give you a couple, and then there are going to be a couple more that kind of fold into it. But there was a question that was asked, do you think that there are steps that employers should take to limit burnout for employees, or to help employees that are struggling, like offering some sort of program? And if so, what would you recommend?
Richard, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can take a first pass at it. And Naveed, I know that you've also done a lot of work lately with employers, so I'll let you fill in any of the gaps. But I think the short answer is absolutely yes. And I think that, some of the tactical steps that employers can take to help support their employees in terms of addressing burnout is supporting them in terms of asking some of these questions that we talked about. How are you relating with your work, and doing some of the deep work necessary to kind of redefine that relationship. I think that's step one. And then, step two is actually like once employees or teammates at companies start to make sense of, you know, how they want to change their relationship with work, to actually support them in making these changes, right? And I think, you know, more tactically, that can oftentimes play out as supporting in terms of setting boundaries, and just, you know, really being cognizant about interpersonal dynamics between executive team and leadership at companies, and the example that they're setting for the rest of their teams. So those are a couple of things that are top of mind for me, but Naveed, I'm sure you have more there.
Yeah, when we look at burnout in the workplace, what we often find is that there are two dimensions on which on what maybe is driving the burnout experience for individuals. One is the individual's relationship with work, which is what we've talked a lot about today. Another is the environment. What is the environment of that workplace that might be creating pressures or dynamics that also promote excessive drive? And we've actually spent a lot of time working with employers directly on the topic of burnout, and almost always when we actually try to address the environmental question, what it comes down to is the relationship that leadership has with their work, and the excessive drive that leadership is actually modeling for employees. So in ways that you could think about supporting employees that, you know, in the workplace, certainly awareness building, like Richard mentioned, is absolutely critical. And to the extent that you can support individuals in analyzing their own relationships with work, absolutely, that's very, very powerful. But I would also mention that having leadership, even if they're not feeling burned out, having them look at their behaviors specifically around excessive drive and what might be, how that might be showing up, could be something that could have really leveraged impact on the organization.
Those are helpful, thank you. The next question, do you think the pandemic will lead to widespread change in the workforce? And will employers be more open to employees working remotely? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's our like realm, not my realm of expertise, but it's pretty clear that the pandemic, all the data that I'm seeing in terms of survey responses right now, especially with a couple of our partner organizations that are really focused on this, is that the trend is pretty clear that organizations are more supportive of remote work environments. I think that one thing that sometimes people will expect is that in a remote work environment, you're maybe less likely to feel burned out. What we actually found prior to COVID was that people that were in remote work environments were just as likely, if not more likely, to feel burned out as people that weren't. That may be less surprising now that so many of us have been in remote work environments and can see the struggles that the lack of boundaries between the spaces in which you work can play in just really having time and space for recharging in really authentic ways.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
There is always also a question directed for you from Sherry in the chat, asking if you went back and spoke with your father after you did this research.
Definitely. I spoke with my dad about it. Yeah. I mean, in terms of what came from that conversation, it's hard. I mean, he's been living the same way for over 80 years. So there's not necessarily, like I nudge him consistently to be like, Dad, you can spend the money like on yourself right now, because this is your retirement. This is like what you worked so hard for. I want you to be happy. I want you to have that spaciousness. But you know, it changes are happening little by little, I'd say. Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
So those are all of the questions that have come. And if there's anyone else that has something else that they would like to ask, now would be the time. Otherwise, thank you so very much again. The website link is in the chat for the offer for CMC community members. And I think that is it. So thank you all for your time. We will unmute if you would like to say goodbye and thank you. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact the Office of Alumni and Parent Engagement. If you have ideas or suggestions for things you would like to see in the future for virtual programming, we would love to hear. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks everybody.
Take care.
Thanks very much.
Presentation.
That was awesome.
Thank you. Have a
Thanks,
good
everyone.
day.